a values-driven business group, the first two words are really, really important. One generation of leadership from now, let's say, everything happens that you guys want to have happen in the next few years. And I don't mean 20 years in generational terms. I mean, 4 or 5 years in organizational terms, turnover of leadership. If you don't have those principles relatively well imbued within the culture, a value-neutral business group is not a value-neutral group. Right? A value-neutral business group becomes not too many years the Oregon Business Association, which was started to be a values-driven group. They defined their purpose as to be a business group and to be moderate. The mixture of those two things, I think, was a bad mixture. They then made a strategic decision, try to get as big as they could and start adding big companies. And pretty soon, they just start looking at, hey, wait a minute, if a set of tax measures comes up, we know what all you guys make. It's pretty clear how we have to come down on this, right? And I think you start looking at certain regulatory structures, at certain other things, certain tax break packages, and it comes out the same. So value, but I think a values-driven business group could be one of the most valuable spokesperson, but voices that could happen in the conversation, right? How can we do good and do well? People that can speak from that, podium, I think is a great way.
One of the interesting things that you're talking about with homegrown, like Sanyo coming into Salem, I think it was this huge celebration, but in reality it's not a celebration at all, because it's profits going off, the stuff's not actually even manufactured here, they're just using our water.
Subsidies.
And then sending it back to Japan, then Japan's actually doing the high-tech manufacturing, then sending it back to the United States. But how do you frame conversation so that, because it's easy when you look at a big company, you look at Sanyo and you're like, they're big, they're easy to deal with, they have a lot of money, as opposed to more the homegrown, which is going to be more that agrarian, Jeffersonian approach you started with, where you're helping the small people rise up. How can you do that? And being here is a great setting of that. I mean, you have a relatively small timber operation, but how can you set up many more of those across the land to help that actually do some of these things that you're going for?
It's a great question, and I want to assure you that what I'm about to say ends with an ellipsis rather than an exclamation point, because I think the question is more important than the answer, but I'll give you some thoughts. The first thing I would say is start spending on different things. So right now, if you're the Oregon Business Development Department, and I now know this, you make your pitch to Sanyo or somebody else, and your best arguments are tax breaks, cheap water, cheap energy. And none of the three of those are the people getting a good deal. It's a little bit like the LNG debate on the coast. I have no sword drawn for your liquefied natural gas as a source of energy. I don't have really a way to evaluate it versus another source of energy. It might be much better than a lot of other things we do. It sounds to me better than nuclear. I mean, I don't know it's so bad. And I don't. And there are a lot of people who aren't in the always in the environmental caucus. But we should always be in the don't steal my shit caucus. Don't steal our stuff. Yeah. Right? And too often the people are just getting a bad deal. And it's not, and if we can frame it in those terms and say you're just not getting a good, you don't know you're not getting a good deal, but you're not getting a good deal. And here's how you're going to get a better deal. So that's some of the things to stop. Some of the things to start, I think, are relatively obvious. The challenge is they are not the kinds of things that sound immediately attractive to a given corporate lobbyist who wants to come home with a pelt for his or her client. Right? It's not, Lenny Bergstein, who's on Channel 2, I think, Channel 8 something, doing political analysis and as a highly paid political consultant. He helped his client get $10 million Betsy credits, right, for a single project, which is 9 times as many as they should have gotten. And that's 9 really valuable pelts he can bring back. And he can charge a lot in order to get that. So I reckon, and that's part of the political challenge we have related to why I think, all the crap I was saying before. But some of the things I think we do need to be investing in. Well, let's take a look at. I want to say one more thing about tax breaks. We now spend more on tax breaks and expenditures in this state than we do on education, healthcare, and public safety combined. Okay? Which is an astonishing fact. Almost nobody knows it, And it's mind-boggling. And there's a number of reasons for that. One is that it takes 31 votes to add a tax break in the House. It takes 36 votes to get rid of one. Another is because that's one of the few things you can do. Because the right wing so thoroughly discredited the tax and spend idea, which, by the way, is what government does. Taxes and spends. Okay. That if you're that's right, that's the idea. That if you are somebody who got into government because you want to do something, right? And you say, I want to do something about water. Well, you look in the DLC handbook, tax breaks, and you'll look up the WETC. Right, we want environment. You'll look and you'll find the Betsy. Right, we want to find almost any kind of public interest conduct. We want to help poor neighborhoods, new markets tax credit. Right, each of these things, 1 or 2 degrees of separation of tax giveaway, of a gift of the public treasury to a privately interested party, and so you got to stop some of that. One of the things I think you can invest in is pretty standard stuff. It's not, but really important. So where are we right now? We're in the bottom 10. We were second to last in higher education. Spending per person. That's a catastrophe. Right? That is not. I mean, that is. If you were doing strategic planning for how a state could compete in the global economy in this century, that'd be top 3 jobs, right? Cheap water. I mean, like if cheap water, cheap energy, and tax breaks. You've just described how to develop a third world economy, right? Which is what we're doing. And if you wanted to be a first world economy, if you want to lead in the knowledge sector, then you'd invest in higher education and you'd invest in early education. Let me say one more thing about it because it's a good story for you to tell your business friends. Minnesota in 1980 had 10 Fortune 500 companies located there. Oregon around that same time period had about also 10 Fortune 500 companies based in Oregon. Now Minnesota has 18 and Oregon has 2. The biggest difference has not been marginal tax rates. In fact, they're a little bit higher tax state than we are because they have personal income tax and a property tax and the sales tax. The biggest obvious delta, education funding. They've spent a lot, including on the University of Minnesota. We haven't, right? And most of those companies have workforce development as a piece of their kind of creation myth, right? Most of from the biotech companies, et cetera, with partnerships with the University of Minnesota. So I think there are other investments. The little bill we did, what the economic gardening bill essentially looks at stage 2 businesses with high growth potential and develops a program which pretty much is advanced market research to help homegrown companies find new markets, right? And that kind of economic development strategy rather than here's cheap water, here's cheap energy, et cetera. I think there's other things. I mean, I think that had Ted either had the resources, had the gall, had the vision, whatever, I think Brand Oregon could have been a really cool thing. But I don't think you brand Oregon by just saying if it's from here, it's Oregon. I think you do a thing that is, if it's excellent, if it's sort of a triple bottom line, thing, it's socially responsible, it's environmentally sustainable, and it's hot. Right? Then it gets the brand Oregon. And if you get the brand Oregon, you get all kinds of cool stuff, right? Like a real marketing campaign and all the rest. It's not a brand and a logo and a website, right? It's, real stuff. And if and let me put an audacious, crazy idea that is not going to happen, if John Kitzhaber is elected governor or if Dudley is, or Bradbury, anybody else, but still would be awesome, is if we said, okay, we're gonna have Bonneville start charging market rate for its energy. We're gonna take all that money. Okay, this is never gonna happen. I understand this. We're gonna start charging market rate for its energy, and that we're gonna take that money and invest it in blank. Or we say, we say we're gonna go up from 51% of the potential general fund and tax base. We're gonna get down to 40%. By the way, in the early 90s it was 33%. So that's possible. We're gonna take that extra, change that deal, and we put it into a marketing effort for homegrown businesses. We put that into advanced market research for homegrown businesses. We put that into higher education. I think we would see over time, not an overnight thing, but I think over time we'd see a significant economic impact.